All the children who would like to go back to children's church can go back at this time. So I was hanging out with some friends the other day, and they mentioned just how many Hallmark Christmas specials there are. And I didn't believe them. So I looked it up. From 2000 to 2009, there were 31 Hallmark Christmas specials, for an average of just 3 per year. Specials like A Dog Named Christmas, Mrs. Miracle, The Christmas Choir, just to name a few. However, in 2010, there was a big leap. And in 2010, there were 10 Christmas specials. The Santa Incident, Farewell, Mr. Kringle, and that long-standing holiday classic, The Town Christmas Forgot. In 2011, there were 14. In 2012, there were 13. In 2013, there were 14. 2014, there were 15. In 2015, there were 19. In 2016, there were 26 different Hallmark Christmas specials. And in 2017, there will be 38 brand new Hallmark Christmas specials. Furthermore, they all involve these random and inane themes. Since 2010, there have been 170 Hallmark Christmas specials, and from everything I can tell, not any of them have anything to do with the real meaning of Christmas. Yet they all seem to have the same underlying theme. Christmas is special. Christmas is magical. Christmas is wonderful. Christmas is powerful. Christmas brings out the best in people. Christmas invites love, joy, peace, and hope into our lives and into our world. And I believe that they are absolutely 100% correct, yet they just fail to mention the source of all this Christmas magic. You would think after 170 specials that someone might get wise and be like, hey, I see all the results of the magic of Christmas and the wonder of Christmas, but where's the source? And of course, we believe that the answer to that question can be found in the Scriptures. And I would like to take us to Isaiah 9, chapter 9, where 700 years before Christ, Isaiah tells us of this most remarkable and unusual event. An event that not only changed Israel, but an event that I believe changed the world and also eternity. And we're just going to kind of work through the first 7 verses here. And so let's just start with verse 1. And it reads like this. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles by the way of the sea along the Jordan. Now, the first 8 chapters, if you were here the last couple of weeks, you would know this because we worked through the first 8 chapters of Isaiah, but they talk about, or Isaiah talks about, all these prophecies against Israel and how there really was doom and gloom and distress in the land. And darkness very much did cover the land. And so there's all this stuff going on with both houses of Israel. There's Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And at this time, they're 2 separate kingdoms. But for our sake today, we will refer to them both as the collective Israel. And he talks about Zebulun and Naphtali and about how they have been humbled. And he's referring back to these first 8 chapters and all of the conquest and these invading armies and all of that. And Zebulun and Naphtali are on the border, and they face the brunt of all the savage and brutal attacks that the Assyrians brought on Israel as a people. But now he begins alluding to this event that he's going to describe here in the next few verses. But he talks about how there's hope coming, and specifically it's going to take place in the region of Galilee and the Jordan, which weren't really any particularly special area in Israel. You would think that if you were a Jewish person of that day, that if something significant was going to take place, it would probably take place in Jerusalem. But he's saying no, in this really more of a kind of a backwater corner of Israel, this remarkable event is going to take place. Then he leads to verse 2, which we just spent the last 2 weeks on, but it reads like this: the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And as we discussed the last couple of weeks, verse 2 serves as a synopsis for everything that has gone on in the prior 8 chapters. And let's see if we can't bring everybody up to speed here. There were really 3 themes that this verse pulls out of the first 8 chapters, and they are the 3 primary themes of the first 8 chapters. First of all, the people are walking in darkness. They have disobeyed God. They have walked away from Him. They have turned their backs on Him. And we see this especially in Isaiah chapter 1, where there's all of this corruption and greed, and there's apathy towards the poor. There's all of these things going on where Israel has sinned. Because they have sinned, that darkness has led to death, because sin leads to death. And so it says on those living in the land of the shadow of death. And so they're experiencing terrible things in the land. There is, again, conquest. There is exile. There is occupation. The people are in a really bad place. Which leads us to the third theme that we find in the first 8 chapters, and that is that God is going to send a Messiah. He's going to send a deliverer, someone to rescue them from all of this darkness, all of this death, all of the exile and the conquest and the occupation, all of that stuff. And he has promised this hope in the form of a child who will save them from their sins. And so there are 3 themes about the prophecies throughout Isaiah and really throughout the Old Testament that we pick up about this Messiah. And that's the light. Like when it says on those walking in the land of darkness, those they have seen a great light, and then a light has dawned. That's the light. He's referring to these prophecies. And again, the first thing we see about this Messiah is that the Messiah is going to come in the form of a child. In Isaiah 4:2, he's described as the branch, and he says the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious. And he's not called a child here, but when referring to the same branch, the same Messiah, in chapter 11, verse 6, he clearly identifies him as a child. That's the passage where it reads, the wolf will lie down, or will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat, and the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. And so the Messiah will come as a child, and he picks up the theme of the Messiah as a child in chapter 7, verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign, and the virgin will be with child, and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Twice more he mentions Emmanuel in chapter 8. And so we see here that in verses 1 and 2, that Isaiah is reminding us that God is up to something. That he is sending a Messiah, a deliverer, a savior, a king even, who will establish an incredible kingdom. And then, in the next 3 verses, he goes on to describe what this kingdom is going to be like. God is sending this incredible king, and so when he establishes his kingdom, what is it going to look like? And he writes, you have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as men rejoice when dividing the plunder. As in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. And so just as gloom and distress in the first two verses of Isaiah 9 describe really more of a mood or a tone that is over Israel, so too do these next three verses describe a tone or a mood of the kingdom. And the first thing he says is that, you have enlarged the nation. I personally don't believe that is referring to a geographical expansion. The Jewish people primarily identified themselves as the people of God. And yes, the land was very important to them. They saw the land as a sign of God's blessing. But Canaan was Canaan. Like he gave them Canaan, this specific area with specific borders. And Canaan was not Assyria. Canaan was not Egypt. And so increasing the land geographically would not have made sense to them. What would have made sense to them is increasing their number as the people of God. Increasing the people of God. They would have gotten very excited about that. They would have felt that was something incredible and something to rejoice over and something to celebrate. And so the question becomes, well, exactly who are these people that God is going to add into Israel to enlarge the nation and to increase them as the people of God? And this is the first clue where I believe that there's something going on. There's something afoot here that is much greater than just Israel itself. And I personally believe that he's referring to the church, those who will come in to the people of God by faith. He then says, goes on to describe what the kingdom is like. Again, the tone, the mood, the feeling of the kingdom. And he says, people will rejoice as men rejoice at the harvest. And I think this is one of those allusions that we find in the Bible, or one of those references that we find in the Bible that we have a hard time relating to today because we are not in an agrarian society anymore. And so like back in the day, people would work and they would toil and they would worry as they worked towards the harvest because that's what they ate. That's how they lived. And if the harvest didn't come in, it meant extremely difficult times ahead. It meant a very, very difficult winter. It meant that, they would be starving and they may not even make it. They would have to call on reserves, or they would have to find something to make it work. And so when the harvest finally did come in, it was the biggest day of the year. It was the biggest reason they had to celebrate. And it meant that they didn't have to work or toil anymore, at least until the next growing season. And it meant that they just didn't have to worry anymore, that they could rejoice and celebrate because the harvest had finally come in. And he's saying that this is what the kingdom is going to be like. It's going to be a time of celebration and rejoicing because our work and our toil is over and we don't have to worry anymore. He then relates the kingdom to how men rejoice when dividing plunder. Again, an image I'm not sure a lot of us can really relate to very well. It's an image of battle, and most of us here have not faced battle. Maybe one or two of us have. Certainly not battle in the way that they exchanged in battle with, swords close up. It's bloody, it's visceral. It had to be absolutely terrifying. It had to be brutal, and it's the kind of thing that when you rode into battle, you didn't know if you were coming back. You didn't know, because this was mostly by clan or by village, you didn't know if your father was coming back. You didn't know if your brother was coming back. You didn't know that if you lost, if your entire household would be plundered, your entire village would be plundered. You didn't know if you would be taken as slaves, like you and your entire family would then become servants of somebody else. And so when you made it through and everything was okay, the relief had to be palpable. And then to the victor goes the spoils. So if your village or your clan was fighting somebody else and you defeated them, then they went and divided up what those other people had. And so, and I'm not saying it's politically correct, because it's not. It's just how it was back then. And not necessarily in Israel, although I think when Israel engaged in battle, this sort of thing happened. But this was throughout the known world at that time. And so you would, however they divided everything up, you would receive maybe some livestock for your family, maybe you would receive some gold or some wealth in other ways, or maybe you would even receive servants. And so imagine that this is you, like you are riding into battle with swords and axes and shields and all of that stuff, and you're going to just hand to hand, you're going to throw down with these other guys, and as brutal and as savage as it is, and then you make it through, and then you come back to your families, and you are experiencing the glory and the riches, or the benefits at least, that come from that. And all of that together, like that entire experience had to be absolutely euphoric. Because you move from this place of abject terror, this place of fear. I don't even know that I'm going to live, now to this point where your household is actually enhanced and increased, and there's euphoria. And so what he's saying is this dynamic, or not this dynamic, but this feeling of euphoria, of victory, of coming through in a better place is what the kingdom is going to be like. And then he turns it around. And he says, oh, don't just imagine that you were the victor. Imagine that you were the one who was defeated. Imagine that you was the one who had his household plundered, that maybe even you or your family were taken into captivity, that you are the one who now bears the yoke of slavery. That's what the bar across the shoulder is, that you are no more or no better than a beast of burden at this point. And so you are experiencing constant pain, shame, humiliation, degradation, because you are a slave. And there's no sense trying to run away, because your family's there. It's like impossible to do. And if you do try to run away, or if you don't give your all, or you don't measure up for any reason, your oppressors do not hesitate to take the rod across your back. And so it's this place of utter helplessness and utter hopelessness. And imagine that's you, and that's how you live, and that's your mindset. And then out of the blue, some liberator comes riding over the hill with his army. And he defeats your oppressors. And he sets you free, and he takes the shackles off, and he releases you from your bondage, and he restores you to where you were before. The sense of wonder and elation would have to be absolutely incredible. And he's saying, this is the tone, this is the mood of the kingdom. It is a feeling, it is a mood of wonder and elation. And then he says, oh, and by the way, while we're talking about war and we're using these war analogies, that whole dynamic is over. Like in the kingdom, there is going to be no more war, which again is an image that would have meant an incredible amount to them, but means probably very little to us, because we don't live the way that they had to live. You see, these were a people where most of them lived in constant fear of their neighbors, because the world at that time, the way things functioned, again, not necessarily in Israel, but certainly with the surrounding nations, is that the strong subjugated the weak. Like if my village was stronger than your village, or my nation was stronger than your nation, there's really nothing to stop me from rolling into your village and taking whatever it is that I wanted that you had. And so they lived with constant fear, constant vigilance, constantly looking over their shoulders. When they're out in the fields, they're looking over the hill because they never know when somebody's going to ride in. Especially if your village didn't have a wall with watchtowers and watchmen on it. Like every night you would go to sleep and wonder if maybe in the morning or in the middle of the night everything's on fire and marauders are just, going through slashing at everybody. And so this feeling was a part of their psyche. It was this incredible sense of insecurity, this incredible sense of unrest, of unpeace, if you will, that they had and that they were constantly aware of, and it was just ingrained in who they were in so many different ways. And then imagine that something happens, something big, and all of that just melts away. Like there is a genuine and lasting peace. And not only is there a genuine and a lasting peace, but you believe it. You know what I mean? Like you own it. That you understand that you have nothing to fear from anyone anymore. That you don't need to look over your shoulder. You don't need to worry. All that is over. There is genuine, lasting peace. The feeling of rest, of relief that comes from that, again, have to be incredible. And so Isaiah is kind of painting a picture. Instead of very distinct, strokes and, where it's very clear, almost like a picture, he's like an impressionist, where he's giving you images, he's giving you ideas and feelings and tones, and he's saying, this is the mood and the tone of the kingdom and what it's going to be like. These are the qualities of the kingdom, and it's absolutely incredible. And then he goes from talking about the kingdom to talking about the king, because what he's saying is, a kingdom like this can't be led by just any king. Like this king has to be special. This has to be a king that's more than an earthly king, because an earthly king cannot possibly accomplish this. And so he begins to tell us in verse 6 who this king is. And he says, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government, and he's talking about the kingdom here. And the word doesn't mean government the way we do. It means authority and rule. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty, God, Everlasting, Father, Prince of Peace. And so, the government will be on his shoulder is a statement that he will reign over his kingdom and he will establish his rule. And no earthly king, no earthly army, no earthly politics will be able to threaten his reign. That because he has all authority, that everything will be exactly the way that he desires it to be. Everything is going to be exactly the way that it is supposed to be. And then it says that he will be called Wonderful. And wonderful here is not necessarily a qualifier of counselor. In fact, when you understand the Hebrew and what the word is, it's not a qualifier of counselor. Wonderful stands on its own. And the word in Hebrew literally means worker of wonders. That he's going to be a wonder worker. He is going to be full of wonder. I don't think it's a big leap here to say that he's going to be a worker of miracles. And so he's a wonder worker, this king. Perhaps he will heal the sick. Perhaps he will demonstrate mastery over nature and do things like calm the storm. Perhaps he will feed the hungry. Perhaps he will cast out demons. Perhaps he would even raise the dead, because he is a worker of wonders. He is full of wonder. The word counselor here, the Hebrew, literally means that he speaks with wisdom. That he speaks with insight and understanding. And it makes perfect sense that the king of this kingdom is one who is going to speak with wisdom and with understanding. And so perhaps, I don't know, perhaps he would tell us how to enter this incredible kingdom that he reigns over. And perhaps he will give us the principles and the values of his kingdom and the rules and the laws of his kingdom. And he may even be willing to give us the keys to the kingdom. And then we see the word mighty, which is powerful. And again, not necessarily a qualifier on God. What we have here in chapter 6 really are 8 words to describe the name of this king. And every word is genuinely independent from the other words. There are 8 descriptors that are actually meant to be read together as a single name. So like, this is his name, these 8 words. This encompasses who he is, his identity. And so it could be read as mighty and then God, or mighty God, which is, and I only say that because that's how we always read it. We read it in 4 sets of 2 words, one qualifying the other. But either way, it's impressive what this implies. And really don't have the time to go into all of this. Ran out of time because Christmas is tomorrow. But it means that he has the power and might to rule his kingdom and to enforce his rule, which means security, safety, confidence. Because he is God, that nothing can threaten what he establishes. The word used for God here is very specific and very intentionally specific. Like, he could have used the word Elohim, which in context refers to God like 99% of the time throughout Scripture. But there is an off context here where Elohim actually means hero or mighty one. And so, just not to get confused, Isaiah uses the word El, which 100% of the time always means God Almighty. And it is a direct reference to the divinity of the child, and I believe a foreshadow of the idea of the New Testament Trinity. He will be called Everlasting Father. Again, everlasting and Father could be separate, could be together, probably meant to be read both ways. Everlasting means that his kingdom is likewise everlasting. An everlasting king will have an everlasting kingdom. Again, another allusion, another hint, another clue that he's talking about something far greater than Israel, because Israel is an earthly kingdom. And all earthly kingdoms come to an end, but this kingdom will be everlasting. It will never come to an end. The term Father, especially in this case, for me, I don't know about you, but it just reminds me of Jesus when he says, I and the Father are one. Again, I personally think it's a very clear reference to divinity and Trinity. Also, the term Father that's used here, in Hebrew there's some different words for Father, and this word connotes the best of fathers. It's the picture of the most benevolent Father, the good and wise Father who is gracious and merciful. And so this is going to be the qualities of his kingdom. He's going to rule with goodness and benevolence and mercy and grace and peace, because he's going to be this kind of Father. He will be called Prince of Peace. These are the only two words that really seem to almost necessitate one qualifying the other because of how it's read, or at least I haven't figured out how they work separately. And I think it's the final part of the name because it kind of works as a crescendo. Because, at least from my observation, the one thing that more people in this life want more than anything else is peace. And I think even peace is a complicated concept or a complicated reality for a lot of us because some of us just crave physical peace. You know, like people are living in situations where there is hostility and different types of hostility. Sometimes our own bodies are basically rebelling against us, and we just want peace from all of that. We want it to rest from all of that. And then, of course, there's social peace or maybe even relational peace with the people that are around us in our lives. And it's amazing how many of us live in constant conflict and constant tension. And there's these demands and these pressures and all this stuff, and we just want peace. And then, of course, there's political peace. And I think in our nation today, more so than at any other time, at least during my lifetime, and I'm not the greatest student of history, but I try to be somewhat a student of history. I don't know that we've ever been more polarized in the way we are now. And regardless of what side you're on, it's like you can't even turn on your computer or turn on the news or anything without just this sense of dread and anxiety and worry just coming over you. And it's difficult. It's hard. And then there's spiritual peace, which I think is the greatest need of all. And that's that peace within our own hearts, within our own souls. From all the stuff that's just churning inside in our own, self-recrimination and our self-judgment and just, all of the stuff that just goes on. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And his kingdom is going to be a kingdom of peace from all of that. Talk about a tone for a kingdom. There will be peace from all of the stuff that encroaches on our lives now because he is the Prince of Peace. At the expense of redundancy, can I remind you of something? 700 years. This was given 700 years before Christ. And yet, I don't know of a more clear presentation of the identity of Christ that captures the ethos and the tone and the mood of who he is and what he's about. And I understand the New Testament gives far greater detail, and it does just an incredible job of describing Christ as a worker of wonders and how he is full of wonder and a worker of miracles and all that. And it does an incredible job of how he gives just such transcendent wisdom. It's like beyond anything that anybody had ever heard, at that time. And I personally think since, and we're going to get into some of that tonight as we just really break down verse 6 tonight. And it does a great job of talking about his power and his authority and ultimately his kingdom and how it's everlasting and what all that's about and the fact that he is even God. But nowhere is it presented so succinctly and so eloquently that God is sending a child, a Messiah, Emmanuel, God with us, a Savior, a deliverer. And he is going to establish an everlasting kingdom a kingdom of peace and joy and truth and freedom and justice and righteousness. And so Israel, get ready, because the gloom and distress is dissipating. And even now, the darkness fades as a new light has dawned. And all of this in the context of verse 7, of the increase of his government, could just as easily be translated kingdom here. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. And the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. This knowledge, this peace, this joy, this hope, it has this incredible way of just drawing us in. It resonates with us. And so it draws us in and it fills us up. I believe that it finds expression in our lives. And what I mean by that is, how in the world is it possible to believe any of this and not rejoice? How is it possible to believe any of this and not celebrate? How is it possible to believe any of this and not behave differently towards our brother? How is it possible to believe any of this and not share this peace and this joy and this love and this hope and this justice and this righteousness and all of these things with the world around us, and to embody these values and these things? And so, yes, Hallmark, Christmas is special. Christmas is wonderful. Christmas is magical. However, talking about all this Christmas wonder without ever mentioning the King and his kingdom is like celebrating the light without acknowledging the sun that gives it. Let's pray.